Welcome back to a new chapter of Brilliant Minds Unlocked. Imagine a life forged in the crucible of adversity, a mind that just refused to bend, a spirit that dared to dream way beyond the confines of its time. We're talking about someone who, born right at the dawn of the 20th century, would one day, well, ignite the hearts of two whole continents. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into the extraordinary life and, frankly, radical philosophy of Agostinho da Silva. You've shared some fascinating excerpts from Agostinho da Silva. A life of freedom and fire. And our mission really is to unpack the most profound nuggets of knowledge, those surprising facts, and maybe some aha moments from his journey. We want to understand what it truly means to be free and how just one person can spark a revelation of thought that, still resonates today. He wasn't just a philosopher. He was like a living question mark, challenging everything from, well, the very idea of work to the role of government. So what does his story tell us about courage, authenticity, and the power of an unchained mind in a world that often demands conformity?
It's truly compelling how Agostinho da Silva's personal journey, his life story, so directly shaped his really radical ideas. You see, he was born in Porto, Portugal, but his life began with this striking paradox. An urban birth, right, followed immediately by an infancy spent in the remote, almost wild landscapes of Barca d'Alva, and this early experience with such vast, sort of untamed spaces seems to have deeply influenced him, mirrored the expansiveness, the borderless nature of his later thoughts. But the real crucible, the profound test, it came not from geography, but from the iron grip of the Estado Novo regime. This was the authoritarian dictatorship that controlled Portugal for decades, suppressing dissent, individual freedoms, and it cast this long shadow over his formative years. This historical context raises a really important question. How does oppression, instead of crushing a spirit, sometimes forge a more fervent philosopher of freedom?
That's a perfect framing for his early life. Yeah. And that brings us right to a critical, really defining moment in 1935. As a young teacher, Agostinho was faced with a direct order to sign a declaration. Now, this wasn't just some administrative task, right? It was a loyalty oath, basically, a demand that he renounce any association with subversive organizations, essentially, a requirement to pledge absolute obedience to the Estado Novo. It was a moment designed to test your very core. So, faced with that immense pressure, what did he do?
He refused, just like that. With this unwavering conviction, he simply said no. And this single act of defiance, which might seem small under a dictatorship, it carried immense weight. It wasn't just about losing his teaching position, which, yes, he did immediately. It was about safeguarding his intellectual and spiritual integrity. This refusal was a profound statement. He was prioritizing his conscience, his right to think for himself, over job security, over personal comfort. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it became, you could say, a foundational act for his entire philosophy. It marked him, of course, made him a target. It led to years of surveillance, direct harassment, and eventually his arrest by the secret police, the PID. The pressure just became unbearable, and in 1944, he was forced into exile. He sought refuge in Brazil.
Exile. Yeah, for most people, that word is so heavy with loss, right? Pain and separation, leaving everything familiar behind. But for Agostinho, remarkably, it became what he called a forge for greatness. It's incredible, like a seed scattered by the wind. He didn't just wither, he took root in completely new soil, a new continent. Brazil, with its vastness and its cultural dynamism, it offered him this fertile ground that Portugal under the regime just couldn't. It really makes you pause and think, would you have the courage, when faced with that kind of ultimatum, to risk everything? Your career, your safety, your home, all for your beliefs. His journey really underlines that sometimes, profound personal disruption can be the very catalyst for extraordinary growth. And it was in this new landscape in Brazil that his radical ideas truly started to blossom, because this is where it gets really interesting. What were the core ideas Agostinho da Silva stood for, the principles that defined his philosophy? What was the essence of this freedom he championed so fiercely?
Well, his core belief was freedom, absolutely, but in the most expansive sense you can imagine. It wasn't just political liberty, although that was crucial, obviously, given his experience with authoritarianism. For Agostinho, true freedom included the freedom to be oneself completely, to think without constraint, to create without inhibition, and importantly, to love without the chains of societal expectation or, conventional morality. He believed that this internal, authentic freedom was the absolute prerequisite for any meaningful external freedom. He put it beautifully. Seeing truth not as a single, rigid dogma, but as, and I'm quoting here, the sum of all paradoxes, the meeting point of all contradictions. Now, this wasn't him embracing relativism, not exactly. It was more an acknowledgement of life's inherent complexity, the fact that simple answers often fall short. For him, the journey of understanding was about holding opposing ideas at the same time, exploring the interplay of light and shadow, certainty and doubt. He even wrote, "I'm not interested in being original, I am interested in being true." That's powerful. It was like a living invitation to radical authenticity in a world that then and now often obsesses over conformity and, well, superficial novelty.
That is a powerful idea. Truth, not as a fixed thing, but as something constantly unfolding through contradiction, through questioning. Wow. And his ideas about society, how we organize ourselves, they were truly revolutionary, weren't they? He famously dreamed of a future where technology would totally liberate people from the drudgery, the repetition of unfulfilling labor. The goal being to unleash their creative and spiritual potential. He put it so powerfully. Our whole life revolves around work, but a person is not what they do for a living. A person is simply a person, the most extraordinary thing one can be. I mean, that challenges the very foundation of how so many societies define human worth and purpose.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just a critique of capitalism or, industrial labor. It was a much deeper reevaluation of human existence beyond just economic roles. Building on this, he envisioned something he called an age of the Holy Spirit. Now, this wasn't a conventional religious prophecy, understand. It was a highly philosophical, maybe even utopian social vision. He saw it as a future time when humanity would transcend the need for governments and conventional economies as we know them. Instead, we'd live in a state of spontaneous harmony, guided by solidarity, empathy, a profound kind of spiritual awakening. In this age, technology would serve humanity's liberation, not, enslave us to production. The Holy Spirit here represents a kind of collective consciousness, a unifying principle of shared purpose that would naturally guide how people interact, making external controls like laws and markets basically obsolete. This vision, rooted in deep spiritual and philosophical thought, directly challenged the foundations of the modern nation-state, modern economic systems. It suggested a huge evolutionary leap for humanity itself.
Wow. It sounds like a world almost unimaginable to many of us today, and certainly back in his time. And naturally, ideas this bold, this completely transformative. They weren't without significant controversy, I imagine. He didn't just question work or authority. He provocatively argued that education, something we often see as liberating, had too often been a tool for domination, for, conditioning people to fit into predefined roles, rather than fostering real intellectual freedom.
Precisely. His critique of education was particularly sharp. He saw institutions basically shaping individuals to serve existing power structures rather than cultivating their unique inner being, their true self. He believed true education was about self-discovery, about learning how to be yourself in the fullest possible sense. And beyond this, his views on love and relationships were equally unconventional. He believed true love meant liberating the other person, not controlling or possessing them. And yes, his ultimate vision of a world without government or a traditional economy, that was often dismissed, called wildly utopian, even dangerous or anarchic by people who just couldn't conceive of society functioning without those established structures. But this raises an important question for us, looking back, doesn't it? Isn't it precisely the dreamers, the ones who dare to imagine the impossible, who ultimately move the world forward, who plant the seeds for tomorrow's reality? His utopian thinking, even if controversial, forced people to question their deepest assumptions.
That's a crucial point, yeah, the role of the visionary. So what was the tangible impact, the legacy of these ideas and his defiant spirit? In Brazil, you said he became more than an exile. He became a builder. What did that look like?
His influence in Brazil was, profound and really multifaceted. He was instrumental in helping found several universities, the University of Brasilia, the Federal University of Santa Catarina, among others, and he shaped their curricula with this spirit of interdisciplinary inquiry and openness that was quite revolutionary for the time. He didn't just teach subjects, he instilled a whole philosophy of learning as a lifelong transformative process. And his impact wasn't just in academia, he inspired a whole generation of thinkers, artists, political figures too, bringing this radical spirit of intellectual freedom and humanitarianism to every institution, every conversation he touched. His work was really about building bridges between disciplines, between cultures, and definitely between people.
So he built actual institutions, but also these bridges of thought. That's fascinating. And his influence clearly crossed borders, leaving a mark not just on Brazil, but on, all Portuguese-speaking nations. How do you manage that, to be such a powerful conduit for ideas and inspiration across so many diverse fields?
He really was a bridge between worlds, and I think that's a testament to his incredibly expansive mind. He was a mystic who could converse deeply with scientists looking for universal truths in both, spiritual revelation and empirical observation. He was a philosopher who walked alongside poets, understanding that logic and intuition, reason and emotion were all essential paths to understanding existence. And maybe most importantly, he was a teacher who genuinely saw every single student as unique, irreplaceable, as an entire universe unto themselves. His central teaching, if you could boil it down, was that our first and most profound duty is actually to help others become themselves, to help them shed external expectations and embrace their authentic nature, just as we ourselves must relentlessly strive to be true to our own deepest being. He really embodied intellectual humility while championing radical self-expression.
It's almost like his life itself was the philosophy. He called his approach the philosophy of vagrancy, didn't he? Not vagrancy like homelessness, obviously, but the art of intellectual, spiritual wandering. Staying endlessly open to wonder, never settling for comfortable, easy answers. He believed we should all cultivate a kind of childlike curiosity, be perpetually surprised by the world, always ready to create, to play, to love, without the rigid boxes adulthood often puts us in.
Exactly. And what's truly fascinating here is his deep humility about his own ideas, despite how revolutionary they were. He strongly refused to claim ownership of his thoughts. He insisted, thoughts are like birds. They come to those who are still enough to listen, humble enough to receive. Which really underscores his belief that wisdom isn't something you possess, but something you channel, maybe. Part of a collective human effort. When people asked him about his legacy, or the ultimate goal of his philosophy, he replied with his characteristic poetic grace that the goal is a point without dimension, impossible to reach but beautiful to pursue. Which wasn't him admitting defeat, but rather affirming the infinite journey of self-discovery and perhaps collective evolution. The pursuit itself was the point, the reward. So after this deep dive into Agostinho da Silva's extraordinary life and these profound ideas, what can we really take away? What are the universal lessons here? His life asks each of us some incredibly profound questions, I think. Like, what are you willing to risk for your freedom? For your authenticity? When the world demands your silence or tries to get you to sign away a piece of your soul, will you raise your voice, even if it means losing everything? When exile or failure or hardship knocks at your door, will you see it as just an end, or maybe as a new, unexpected beginning? His story reminds us so powerfully that adversity is not a wall, but a door.
Indeed. Absolutely. He reminds us that the greatest revolutions, the most profound transformations, they really do begin in the soul. And that individual act of courage and authenticity. He teaches us that the courage to be yourself is the spark that can light 1,000 fires. It's beautiful. So this deep dive, it's really a call to action for you listening right now. What chains, maybe subtle ones, are holding you back from your fullest expression? What truths are you afraid to speak, perhaps even just to yourself? What dreams have you buried beneath that suffocating weight of what will they say or what's expected of me?
He held this unshakable belief, didn't he? That the world doesn't need more obedient followers, more cogs in the machine. It desperately needs visionaries, rebels, creators. It needs you to bring your unique light into the world. He famously captured this in such a powerful statement, saying, you can and must have political ideas, but please, your own political ideas, not those of your party, your own behavior, not that of your leaders, the interests of all humanity, not just a part of it. And then he added, and remember that part is the root of party. It's just a profound call for individual responsibility and at the same time, universal empathy.
Agostinho da Silva's entire life, it really serves as this remarkable compass for us. Live for truth, not just for approval. Seek freedom, not just comfort. Embrace the constant process of becoming, not some static state of being. And above all, maybe help others to become themselves, just as you relentlessly strive to become who you truly are. Dare to be yourself. Refuse to sign away your soul for comfort. And embrace the beautiful, maybe terrifying unknown that lies beyond conformity. Because in the end, as Agostinho da Silva's legacy shows us so vividly, the only true failure is not to have lived fully, authentically, courageously. And the only true success is to have become fully, unapologetically yourself. So we leave you with this challenge, this lingering question. Will you too set the world on fire with the unique light of your own being?